The north was colder than ever that year, as if the old gods themselves had sensed something stirring beyond the usual winds and wars. Robb Stark stood near the god's wood in Winterfell, sword sheathed, his direwolf grey wind resting nearby. The War of the Five Kings was taking its toll on every inch of Westeros, but what weighed heavier on Robb's shoulders wasn't just politics or death, it was legacy. He had lost too much, and with every raven he received, the world seemed to twist further into chaos. But a letter arrived. Not just any letter, a sealed parchment bearing a dragon sigil. No one in the north had seen such a symbol arrive since the days before Robert's rebellion. Maester Luwin had looked at it twice before bringing it to Robb. He opened it quietly in the corner of the great hall, reading every word with a frozen face. It was from Daenerys Targaryen, the mother of dragons. The last known living Targaryen heir across the narrow sea. Or so everyone thought. In the letter, she wrote with regal poise. She spoke of her vision, not only to reclaim the Iron Throne, but to build something better. Something fair. She had heard tales of Robb Stark's rebellion against the Lannisters, and saw in him not just another king in a battlefield, but a possible ally. And more than that, someone she could trust. It wasn't a proposal, not yet. It was an invitation. I wish to meet you, she had written, not as conqueror to king, but as woman to man. Perhaps we can end this bloodshed not with swords, but with sense. Robb reread those words more times than he cared to admit. Catelyn Stark, ever the cautious mother, protested. You cannot trust a Targaryen, she said in a sharp tone. Her father burned men alive. Her blood carries madness. She's not her father, Robb replied calmly, still staring at the parchment. And I am not Ned Stark. We have to be better than the ones before us. She said nothing after that, but the look in her eyes was more fear than disagreement. She had lost one son to war already. She wasn't ready to lose another to a woman she'd never met. But the idea was too powerful to ignore. Two of the strongest houses, both wronged by the Lannisters. Both with claims. Both with fire in their blood, literally and symbolically. The North had always wanted to be free, but what if they could instead lead? By the next moon, plans were made. Robb would sail with a small group, including Talisa, his current love, and his most trusted men. But the moment the name, Daenerys, was uttered in their camp, things started to shift. Talisa saw it before Robb did, the way his eyes stayed on the horizon a little longer, the way he read her letter at night in silence. She knew something was changing. You're chasing a dream, Robb, she whispered to him one night in their tent, her hand resting on his. But I wonder if I'm still a part of it. He couldn't answer. Across the sea, in the city of Meereen, Daenerys prepared as well. Ser Jorah Mormont warned her of treachery. The Northmen are proud and stubborn. They may not bow to a dragon queen. But Daenerys had seen enough in her visions, in the fire, in the eyes of those who believed in her. She didn't want Robb Stark to bow. She wanted him to stand beside her. When their ships finally touched the sands of Essos, Robb's first sight of Daenerys Targaryen was not what he expected. She wasn't dressed like a queen. She was barefoot in the sand, her silver gold hair loose, her dragons flying overhead like shadows of gods. He stepped forward, and she looked into his eyes. Neither of them spoke for a long while. Then she smiled and said, "You don't look like a king." And Robb smirked, "And you don't look like a conqueror." They both knew, in that moment, that fate had begun to twist. The meeting between Robb Stark and Daenerys Targaryen was more than just a conversation between two rulers, it was the collision of two storms. From the outside, their first discussions were calm and respectful. But beneath the surface, their hearts were burning with questions, doubts, and something neither of them dared name yet. They spent hours walking through the palace gardens of Meereen. Daenerys, despite her intimidating reputation, spoke softly, but with confidence. Robb listened with quiet intensity, his northern mind always measuring every word, every intention. She spoke of breaking chains, ending tyranny, and ruling with justice. He spoke of northern loyalty, the pain of loss, and the burden of a crown he never wanted but had to wear. It was in one of these quiet moments she asked, "Do you believe in destiny, Robb Stark?" He hesitated. "I believe in duty. And in the price we pay for it." That answer made her pause, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. By the end of the third day, the political discussion had taken a new turn. Daenerys proposed an alliance, military, yes, but perhaps more. A marriage between the king in the north and the mother of dragons would send a message across the narrow sea and through all of Westeros: a new age was coming. One where wolves and dragons didn't need to kill each other to lead. But not everyone welcomed this vision. Talisa felt it first, not in words, but in silence. Robb had been more distant. Thoughtful. Cold, even. He hadn't told her what Daenerys proposed, but he didn't need to. She had seen the look in his eyes after that first meeting. It was the look of a man caught between love and legacy. "You're thinking of it," she said one night, quietly, while the torches flickered against the tent walls. "Of marrying her." Robb didn't deny it. "I made vows to you," he said after a long silence, his voice heavy. "But I also made vows to the north." She looked at him, tears in her eyes. "And which vow means more?" He had no answer. Back in Daenerys's chambers, Ser Jorah remained suspicious. "He's still a Stark. Their pride runs deeper than their loyalty. He could use your name, your dragons, and then turn on you." But Dany shook her head. "No. He's not like the others. He has sorrow in his eyes. The kind only the betrayed carry." Jorah lowered his head. He saw it too. And it scared him. As days passed, whispers grew louder in Meereen. Two rulers, young and ambitious, walking side by side through the halls. Talking in private. Eating together. It didn't take much for rumors to turn into certainty. Still, the official proposal was not made, not yet. Robb requested one thing before he could agree to anything: a visit to the dragons. Daenerys led him herself to the dragon pit at sunrise. The sun painted the sky gold as Drogon, regal, and Viserion soared above them, casting shadows like wings of judgment. Robb stared in awe. "I've heard stories," he murmured. "But this is different." Daenerys stood beside him, her hair catching the light. "They're not just beasts. They're part of me. My strength. My burden. And your weapon." She didn't deny it. "Would that scare you, husband of the North?" He turned to face her. "It should. But it doesn't." And that made her smile. Later that evening, a feast was held in their honor. Nobles from across Essos gathered, all watching the pair with interest, curiosity, and in some cases, envy. Robb sat beside Daenerys, their words few but their glances deep. At one point, she leaned close and whispered, "Do your bannermen know you're considering this?" "They'll accept it when I tell them," he said, sipping his wine. "And if they don't, they'll learn." "And what about the girl you brought with you? Talisa?" He looked away. "That's a different kind of war." Daenerys said nothing, but her expression softened. By midnight, the hall was alive with music and laughter, but Robb stood alone on the balcony, looking at the stars. Talisa joined him, quiet and wounded. "She's beautiful," she said bitterly. "And powerful. And everything I'm not." "I didn't come here to fall in love," Robb replied. "But you did," she said. "Not with her. With the idea of her." He didn't argue. Far below them, in the shadows of the palace walls, a cloaked figure watched them both with interest. A raven was sent that night. To King's Landing. To Tywin Lannister. The wolves and dragons were talking. And someone wanted it stopped. In King's Landing, the raven from Meereen arrived with urgency, its wings black as the schemes it carried. Tywin Lannister read the letter without blinking, his face hardening as his eyes scanned the words. Robb Stark. And Daenerys Targaryen. He said it slowly, as if tasting something sour. So the wolf is sniffing around the dragon. Cersei stood beside him, her expression twisted with distaste. Let them marry. Two fools in one bed. What difference does it make? Tywin raised his eyes to her. If you believe that, you're not thinking like a Lannister. A Stark Targaryen alliance is dangerous. Too dangerous. They're on the other side of the world, she argued. For now, Tywin said coldly. But dragons have wings. And wolves know how to wait. He ordered ravens to every corner of Westeros. Every bannerman still loyal to the crown was to be warned, if Robb Stark and Daenerys joined forces, the war would no longer be between houses. It would be between worlds. Back in Meereen, Robb's days were filled with strategy meetings, walks through the palace, and silent dinners with Talisa, whose eyes no longer followed his, they avoided them. His nights, however, were filled with dreams. In those dreams, he saw fire and snow, dragons flying above the north, and Winterfell reborn not in cold, but in flame. He saw Daenerys beside him, not as a stranger, but as something closer, almost faded. He never had dreams like this before, not even with Talisa. One morning, Daenerys invited him to ride. Not a dragon, not yet, but horses, through the lands outside Meereen. Away from soldiers and politics. Just the two of them. She wore no crown, no armor, only a simple cloak. Robb wore his northern leathers, the direwolf sigil on his chest. They rode for hours without speaking. The desert breeze felt lighter that day, the tension between them thicker. Eventually, she stopped and turned to him. Why haven't you accepted yet? Robb looked at her. Because I don't know if this alliance is about peace, or power. She didn't get angry. Why can't it be both? He didn't answer, and that silence said more than words. That evening, Ser Jorah pulled Daenerys aside. He is honorable. Maybe too much so. He will hesitate, and it will cost you. But Daenerys only said, or maybe he hesitates because he doesn't want to lose what's left of himself. Meanwhile, Talisa met with one of Daenerys's handmaidens. It wasn't a friendly visit. You don't know Robb, Talisa said, her voice low but sharp. He's not a piece in this game. And he's not yours to move. The handmaiden replied calmly, he is your king. You should trust his judgment. I trusted him enough to follow him into war. But I won't stand by while you take his heart and twist it for your throne. But Talisa didn't realize, Daenerys didn't need to twist anything. The heart was already shifting. That night, Robb walked through the dragon pit again. Alone this time. He stared at the massive beasts resting in the shadows. Drogon lifted his head and growled low, his eyes glowing. You'll never kneel to me, Robb whispered. But maybe your queen will never ask me to. Daenerys stood behind him. You don't fear them. I fear what they mean. And what do they mean, Robb Stark? He turned to her. That if I stand with you, I stop being the man my father raised. I stop being just a Stark. And maybe I become something more, or something worse. She stepped closer. I don't want a man who bows. I want a man who fights beside me. But if you can't be that, then go home. It wasn't a threat. It was a challenge. And Robb, son of Ned Stark, didn't run from challenges. But even as their bond deepened, the danger around them grew. Late that night, an assassin crept into the guest chambers where Talisa rested. The blade was silent, but Talisa wasn't. She screamed before the steel could find her. Robb burst in, sword drawn, slashing the intruder down with a single strike. Blood sprayed across the floor. Talisa trembled in his arms, but the look she gave him afterward was more broken than afraid. They want you dead, she whispered. No, Robb replied grimly. They want us apart. He looked at the assassin's ring, marked with a golden lion. The Lannisters were watching. And they were already playing their next move. Blood on the marble floor, the golden lion etched into the assassin's ring, and the tremble in Talisa's voice, those were the three things Robb Stark could not get out of his head. The message from King's Landing was clear, the Lannisters knew. And they were afraid. The attempted assassination of Talisa sent shockwaves through Daenerys's court. Security tightened overnight, the Unsullied doubled their guard, and Grey Worm himself began personally overseeing the patrols near Robb's quarters. Daenerys, upon hearing of the lion-marked ring, grew silent. Not surprised, furious. Tywin Lannister is already making his move, she told Robb later in her chambers, pacing the floor. They fear us, even from across the sea. They should, Robb muttered. But fear makes men dangerous. Daenerys stepped closer. And yet you still hesitate. Even now. After this. Robb looked at her, jaw tight. I don't hesitate because I doubt you. I hesitate because of the cost. To whom? She asked quietly. To everyone, he said. To Talisa. To my men. To my mother, who already thinks I'm selling the North to fire and madness. Daenerys lowered her voice. You won't lose your name, Robb. Or your people. I don't want to take the North, I want to honor it. But I can't do that without you. Those words hung heavy in the air between them, heavier than any sword Robb had ever lifted. Talisa, meanwhile, recovered quickly, but something in her had changed. The warmth in her voice was gone. She no longer looked at Robb the same way. She barely looked at him at all. Instead, she spent her days helping the wounded, speaking with servants, and staying out of the palace halls. She wasn't just afraid for her life anymore. She was afraid of losing her place in Robb's. But even as things unraveled on one side, the threads of alliance were being pulled tighter on the other. A council was held in Daenerys's throne room. Robb, Daenerys, Ser Barristan, Yora, Missandei, and Jon Connington, a former Targaryen loyalist. Maps were unrolled. Names were spoken. Plans were whispered. The Iron Throne will fall eventually, Ser Barristan said. But if the North and Targaryen banners fly together, the kingdoms will see more than power. They'll see purpose. But you'll need more than words and dragons, Jon Connington added. You'll need proof. A bond. All eyes turned to Robb. Daenerys spoke last. Will you marry me, Robb Stark? It was not a question soaked in romance, it was fire and politics, legacy and duty. Yet it didn't feel cold. It felt honest. Robb looked around the table, then down at the map where the North touched King's Landing. I will, he said, voice steady. But not just for war. Not just for thrones. I'll marry you because I believe what we build together will be better than what we've inherited. Daenerys smiled, and for a moment, the weight in the room lifted. But not everyone was ready to celebrate. That night, Talisa confronted him. You're really going to do it, she said, not crying, just tired. You're going to marry her. I'm sorry, Robb said. This war, this world, it's bigger than us. She gave him a long look. I followed you into battle. I stood by you when everyone told me not to. And you gave me love. But I guess even love loses to a crown. She left the next morning, refusing protection, refusing tears. She simply disappeared from Meereen, with only a letter left behind for Robb that read, I hope she's worth everything you'll lose. Robb stood alone with the letter in his hands for a long time, but he did not change his mind. Preparations for the wedding began quickly. The dressmakers of Meereen were not used to northern customs, and the northern lords were certainly not used to Meereenese fire dances and golden dragons carved into every stone. But one thing was certain, the wedding would send ripples across the known world. Ravens flew from Meereen to White Harbor, to Bear Island, to the Vale. Letters written in Robb's hand explained the truth. This was not submission, it was strategy. The North would still be free, still ruled by a Stark. But it would also be allied with the dragons. And when the time came to return to Westeros, it would not come as a divided cause. It would come as a storm. But even as the wedding neared, something dark was growing. Whispers of a Sellsword company marching east. Ships seen on the water. A pale man with yellow eyes speaking the name, Targaryen, with poison in his voice. And far away, in the halls of King's Landing, Cersei Lannister stood before a new ally, a red priestess with fire in her eyes and death in her hands. "The Dragon Queen and the Wolf King think they've won," Cersei said coldly. "Let them have their wedding. Let them celebrate." She turned to the red priestess. "And then, burn them both." The wedding was unlike anything the North or Essos had ever seen. Dragons circled high in the sky while banners of silver wolves and black dragons flew side by side, rippling in the desert wind like prophecy itself. Myreen's grand temple had been adorned in colors never before paired, ice blue and crimson red. Thousands of guests, nobles, warriors, and freedmen, gathered from across the seas to witness something they never thought possible. Robb Stark, King in the North. Daenerys Targaryen, Mother of Dragons. Two legacies joined, not in conquest, but in unity. As Robb stood in front of the altar, dressed in his House Stark leathers with a direwolf clasp over his chest, he looked out across the crowd. Not everyone had come out of loyalty. Many came to watch, to whisper, to judge. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the woman walking toward him now, her silver hair braided in Valyrian knots, a fire-colored gown hugging her frame like smoke clinging to flame. Daenerys did not smile, not yet. She walked like a queen, head high, steps deliberate. When she reached him, her eyes met his and held them, and only then did a flicker of softness break through. The ceremony was spoken in both Old Valyrian and the old tongue of the first men. Missandei translated where needed. Grey Worm and Ser Barristan stood at Daenerys's side, Great John Umber and Meej Mormont stood at Robb's. Their hands were bound with wolf fur and dragon scale fabric, dipped in water and touched by fire, a symbol of balance. Fire and ice. War and peace. When they kissed, the crowd erupted. Some cheered. Some just stared. Others whispered of doom and destiny. But high above, Drogon roared, and the flames he breathed into the sky felt more like a warning than a blessing. The days following the wedding were consumed with strategy. Plans to return to Westeros were no longer dreams, they were being drawn on maps, listed in supply scrolls, and carried by ravens. Daenerys would march from Dragonstone with her fleet and her dragons. Robb would return to the north, rallying houses still loyal to House Stark. Together, they would close the gap between the two halves of a shattered realm. But shadows were growing. Robb found his sleep disturbed by strange dreams, visions of Winterfell buried in snow and ash, wolves burning, and Daenerys standing on a throne of bone, her eyes black like night. He would wake breathless, a chill in his spine. He tried to shake it off, but each night, the dream came again, stronger, darker. Meanwhile, Daenerys began to experience a different kind of pressure. The freedmen of Meereen, who once worshipped her as Mysa, were now uncertain. "You married a foreign king," one of the elders told her during an audience. "Will your dragons still fly for us, or for him?" "My dragons fly for justice," she answered. "For a world without chains." But justice, she was learning, was a fragile thing. And loyalty thinner than dragon wings. Back in King's Landing, Cersei Lannister prepared her own form of loyalty, a pact sealed in blood and flame. She met once more with the Red Priestess, a woman with crimson robes and hair like molten gold. "Is your god ready to answer?" Cersei asked, voice laced with venom. "He has already answered," the priestess whispered. "Fire answers fire. And you will have what you want. But fire takes its own price." "I've already paid with too much," Cersei snapped. The priestess only smiled. A ritual was prepared in the catacombs beneath the great September candles. Blood. Names written in ash. In the center, a figure carved of bone and wax, a dragon curled around a wolf. The priestess spoke in High Valyrian, her hands burning as she summoned power from shadows older than dragons themselves. When it was done, the air smelled like death. Thousands of miles away in Meereen, on the eve of the couple's first march together, Daenerys collapsed in her chambers. Robb rushed to her side, catching her just before she hit the floor. Her skin was burning, scorching to the touch, yet she trembled like a leaf in the cold. Her eyes fluttered, and her lips whispered words in Valyrian he couldn't understand. Maesters came. Missandei wept. Yora stood outside, fists clenched, knowing it was not sickness. It was something else. It's not poison, one healer muttered. It's, like fire is burning her from the inside. Robb stayed by her bed all night, holding her hand, watching her body twist and burn without flame. In the distance, Drogon howled, a sound that made every man in Meereen shudder. The fire that made her was trying to destroy her. And Robb Stark, the wolf from the north, was watching his queen die from something he couldn't fight. Not with swords. Not with armies. And not with love. The room smelled of sweat and smoke. Daenerys thrashed against the sheets like she was caught in a storm no one else could see. Her skin burned hotter than any forge, and still, no fire touched her. Her eyes stayed shut, locked in some fevered realm between life and death. Robb hadn't moved from her side in 2 days. His armor was off, his eyes bloodshot, and his knuckles raw from punching the stone wall out of sheer helplessness. He had faced Lannisters, Boltons, betrayal, and war, but nothing had prepared him for this. Watching the woman he had just married melt in silence. Not from poison or blade, but from something darker. Something ancient. Why is this happening to her? Robb asked for the 100th time, his voice low and shaking. Missandei knelt nearby, eyes wet. She was born of fire. But this is not her fire. Yora stood in the shadows, guilt etched deep into the lines of his face. This is magic, he said grimly. The kind we don't understand. The kind that always comes with a cost. Then find someone who does, Robb snapped. There is someone, a voice said from the doorway. It was Kinvara, the high priestess of R'hllor, newly arrived from Volantis. Her crimson robes flowed like blood across the floor as she stepped forward, her face expressionless. She has been marked by another fire. One sent not by her god, but by her enemies. Robb stared at her. You mean this was done to her? Kinvara nodded slowly. Yes. And if we do nothing, the flame will consume her soul before her body dies. Robb clenched his fists. Tell me how to stop it. There is only one way. You must go into the flame with her. He blinked. What? Your bond is new. The fire seeks to break it before it can root itself in fate. If you go into the fire willingly, your love may shield her long enough for her soul to return. And if it doesn't? Then you both burn. Missandei gasped. Yora cursed under his breath. But Robb didn't even hesitate. Then light the fire. The ritual was prepared at the top of Meereen's highest tower. A pyre of sacred oils and dragon bones was built. Daenerys, unconscious and barely breathing, was laid gently into the center. Robb climbed in beside her, resting her head on his chest. He held her as if it might be the last time. Kinvara stood before the pyre, eyes glowing red with flame. Are you ready, Wolf King? I am, Robb said, not with bravery, but with certainty. She raised her hands and spoke in Valyrian. The torches surrounding them flickered, then exploded into roaring flame. As the fire crept toward them, Robb closed his eyes and whispered into Daenerys' ear. I don't care about thrones. Or legacies. I just want you to live. Come back to me, Dany. The fire swallowed them. No one dared move for hours. The flames roared long after they should have burned out. Missandei wept openly, thinking she had lost them both. Yora paced like a caged animal. Even Grey Worm held his breath. Then, the flames broke. The pyre split in the center, and two figures emerged. Daenerys, standing tall, her silver hair unburnt, her skin glowing like dawn. And Robb Stark, his clothes scorched, skin blistered but alive, holding her hand. The crowd dropped to their knees. Kinvara bowed her head. The gods have chosen them. Fire and ice, and life. By the next morning, the news had spread like wildfire. The Dragon Queen had survived death. The Northern King had walked through fire. And they had come out bound not just by marriage, but by fate. But even in triumph, the cost was heavy. Robb bore burns on his back and chest that would never fully heal. Daenerys remembered little of her fever dream, except one thing. I saw someone, she told Robb. A woman in red. She smiled as I burned. Robb knew what that meant. Cersei. Their war had not even started, and she was already playing with shadows. Letters were sent out that week. One to Jon Snow, still holding the wall. One to Lady Sansa in the Vale. One to Samwell Tarly at Oldtown. One to Yara Greyjoy in the Iron Islands. The time for alliances was now. Winter was coming. But so was fire. And this time, they would not be fighting separately. Robb Stark had chosen his queen. And together, they would bring down the Lion's Den. The march toward Westeros began under a sky split between clouds and sunlight, much like the realm itself. Robb and Daenerys stood side by side on the deck of the lead ship, the sea winds whipping through their cloaks as Meereen faded into the mist behind them. Ahead was war. Revenge. A reckoning. Daenerys had sailed before, but this time felt different. This time, she wasn't crossing the sea alone. Beside her stood a man not just loyal, but willing to burn for her. You never told me what you saw in the fire, Robb said as the shoreline vanished from view. She hesitated. I saw Westeros. But not as it is. I saw it broken, burning. A throne of ash. And a child. His brow furrowed. A child? Daenerys nodded slowly. A boy with gray eyes, and a wolf's shadow. Robb didn't answer, but his heart beat faster. Behind them, their combined army followed, Dothraki riders, unsullied soldiers, northern bannermen from House Mormont, Reed, and even House Glover. House Tarly remained silent. The Vale, still under Sansa's influence, had not yet pledged, but the raven from her had carried cautious hope. Jon Snow's reply had arrived 2 days before they set sail. The wall holds, but barely. The dead stir. If you mean to save the realm, come soon, or there'll be nothing left to rule. Neither Robb nor Daenerys had spoken of that letter out loud. But it haunted them both. Landing at Dragonstone was like stepping into a half-forgotten dream. The island fortress, once home to the Targaryens, welcomed its queen with silence and wind. Robb had never seen it before. It was sharp, jagged, unwelcoming. Fitting, he muttered as he looked up at the black stone dragons perched along the towers. It looks like it's ready for war. Daenerys walked beside him, hand resting lightly on his arm. It always has been. The War Council met that same evening in the war room, where the carved table of Westeros had once served Aegon the Conqueror. Daenerys now stood at its head, but Robb stood beside her, not below. We hit the Crownlands first, Robb said, pointing to the map. Storm's End is held by loyalists to the Baratheons, but they're isolated. If we move through Blackwater Bay, the Lannisters will be forced to stretch their defenses. Tyrion Lannister, now advising Daenerys once more, spoke carefully. Cersei will not go down quietly. She'll burn half the kingdom before giving up that throne. Daenerys's voice was cold. Then we'll give her something to burn for. Meanwhile, ravens arrived daily with news of unrest. Peasants fleeing King's Landing. Riots in Old Town. Rumors that Euron Greyjoy was building a monstrous fleet with dark magic whispered through every port. But worse were the reports from the north. Jon Snow's letters grew more urgent. One line in particular stayed with Robb. The dead don't care who wears the crown. And so a split formed. Not between Daenerys and Robb, but between their cause and the truth. Are we fighting for the throne, Robb asked one night, or are we fighting to survive? Daenerys looked out at the sea. Both. We cannot let the dead take a broken world. We must unite it first. But what if we're too late, he pressed. She turned to him, her voice low. Then we fight them with every dragon, every sword, and every breath we have left. That night, they slept close, not speaking. Dreams of snow and fire clashed behind their closed eyes. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, Cersei sat in the Red Keep, watching wildfire flicker in lanterns while Qyburn reported the latest news. They've landed at Dragonstone. The dragons are real. The North has accepted the Targaryen queen. And our little gift in Meereen, she asked. It failed, he said, eyes downcast. But the fire didn't kill him. The wolf is stronger than we expected. Cersei's lips curled into a smirk. Then we'll cut out the wolf's heart another way. Down in the dungeons, the Red Priestess whispered over bowls of blood, watching flames twist into shapes. She saw something coming. Not dragons. Not wolves. But a shadow with blue eyes and no soul. On Dragonstone's highest tower, Jon Snow arrived at dawn. He looked older. Harder. Worn. When Robb saw him, he embraced him like a brother lost for a lifetime. They said no words at first. Then Jon looked him in the eyes and said, "Winter's here." And Daenerys stepped forward, eyes sharp. Then we fight it together. But in the distance, just beyond the horizon, the Night King's army marched. And all of Westeros would soon learn, crowns mean nothing in the shadow of death. Snow fell like ash on the battlefield outside Winterfell. The North, for all its frost and history, had never seen anything like this. The sky was white, but the air was black, choked with smoke, screams, and the unholy silence that followed the dead. They came without warning. Tens of thousands. Pale, rotting, relentless. The Night King led them from the shadows, his eyes cold as ancient ice. They swept through villages, outposts, and forests. They did not burn. They did not bleed. And they did not stop. Robb Stark stood atop the battlements of his childhood home, now a fortress of fire and hope. Daenerys stood beside him, dressed in black and silver, her hair braided with northern ties. Their armies waited below, northern bannermen, unsullied, Dothraki, Vale Knights, and men from every surviving house that still had the courage to fight. And overhead, 3 dragons circled, Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion. Only Viserion was no longer theirs. He had been lost beyond the wall. And now he returned, blue fire pouring from his maw, ridden by the Night King himself. "He was mine," Daenerys whispered, her voice cracking. "He was my child." Robb gripped her hand. "He's not anymore. And neither is this world if we lose tonight." They had no illusions. This was not a battle for a crown. This was a battle for dawn. Jon Snow led the vanguard. Arya vanished into the shadows. Sansa remained in the crypts with the innocent. Tyrion, despite every cowardly instinct, stood at the walls with a sword in hand. Even Jaime Lannister, now a fugitive from his sister, had taken up arms beside Brienne. Enemies turned allies. Betrayers turned protectors. At the center of it all, Daenerys and Robb, a queen of fire and a king of frost, standing side by side at the edge of the world. The first wave hit like a flood. The dead slammed against the trenches of fire, screaming in silence, crawling over each other like ants. Arrows rained. Spears shattered. Men screamed and were pulled under the sea of corpses. Grey Worm held the front with the unsullied, unflinching. The Dothraki rode into the storm and vanished like sparks in wind. Northern men fell defending their homes. Blood turned the snow black. And then the dragon's dove. Drogon and Rhaegal unleashed firestorms across the dead, burning entire battalions in seconds. But then Viserion appeared, his flames unnatural, blue, cold, devastating. He struck Rhaegal in the sky, forcing the beast down in a swirl of ice and broken wings. Daenerys screamed. Robb held her. Fly, Drogon. Burn him. But as she climbed aboard, something struck the walls, hard. A massive ice spear, hurled from the Night King's hand, shattered the towers of Winterfell like they were paper. Soldiers tumbled into the dead. A breach opened in the northern flank. The dead poured through. Robb turned to the defenders. To me, he roared, wielding his sword. For Winterfell. He fought like a man possessed, cutting through the whites with fury only a king who had burned for love could carry. Beside him, Arya struck from shadows. Brienne cleaved through monsters with her greatsword. But they were losing ground. Too many. Too cold. Too fast. In the sky, Daenerys faced the Night King alone. Drogon met Viserion in mid-air, fire and ice colliding in a storm that lit the night. Daenerys hurled a spear, missing. The Night King grinned. He raised his hand, and Drogon buckled, struck with a wave of death magic. Daenerys fell. Robb saw her crashing down in the distance and ran. He left everything, his sword, his men, even his name behind. He found her barely alive, surrounded by whites. And then he did something no Stark had ever done. He screamed. Not in pain. But in fury. Grey Wind, long thought dead, emerged from the smoke. The dire wolf, massive and glowing with ghostlight, leapt into the undead, tearing them apart like paper. Robb lifted Daenerys into his arms and carried her toward the heart of Winterfell. The gods would. There, Bran Stark waited beneath the weirwood, eyes white as the snows around him. He's coming, Bran whispered. You must end him now. Or all is lost. Robb turned. The Night King entered the grove, his sword drawn, his eyes locked on Daenerys. She stood beside Robb now, weak but unbroken. And together, they faced him. They fought, not just with weapons, but with fire and memory. The weirwood pulsed with ancestral power. Bran whispered ancient words. Daenerys unleashed the last breath of Drogon's flame. And Robb drove a blade of dragonglass deep into the Night King's heart. He shattered like ice beneath sunlight. The dead fell. Silence followed. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the sun rose over the north. They buried the dead for days. Robb and Daenerys stood at the gates of Winterfell, hands still linked, their armor blackened, their crowns forgotten. We won, she said softly. For now, he replied. The throne still remained. Cersei still breathed. But they had something stronger than dragons or swords now. They had survived fire. They had survived death. And they had done it, together. No longer wolf and dragon. Now, they were one.